Yes, let me just mention that this is WRWK Midlothian, Virginia, 93.9, and your FM dial if you're within 10, 15 miles of the station. But if you're on the internet, you can see us in your on mind's eye or on when it works, the Zoom or Facebook Live. And we're here to present you Finding Our Fit, which is a constant job, 24/7 job for all of us here. But what else can you do on an exciting working planet where there's life and we're a part of it? My gosh, what an opportunity to do something useful. That's my theme. So over to you.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, Ron. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone, and good evening. This is John Weaver, and I am your guest host here, regular guest host of Finding Our Fit. If our world seems to make less and less sense to you lately, you're not alone. There are so many viewpoints on a constant stream of news stories and technologies and ideas. Even if we could understand everything about a certain point in time, everything is constantly changing and we'd have to start all over again. No wonder we can find ourselves feeling overwhelmed and maybe even a little stressed or anxious. Who can make sense of it? And even more importantly, what do we do about it? Finding Our Fit is a program that helps us to make sense of this crazy yet beautiful world. We accept that we can't know everything. In fact, we embrace that fact. We also embrace that we can focus on the processes of understanding our world and our relationship to it. After all, how we connect to everyone and everything defines our world for us. And we can define our world to be a place of hope, meaning, and purpose. Today's show is titled Race Relations, the intersection of race and unity. This evening, we are blessed to have members of the Lincoln High School, Chapel Hill High School Bridge Builders Committee. This is actually the board members of the Bridge Builders Committee. This committee is comprised of members of the former segregated schools in the Chapel Hill area. Lincoln High School was the blacks only high school. Chapel Hill High School was a whites only high school. And these are students from the classes in the 1960s. These remarkable individuals were members of these schools during the processes of desegregation. You will hear their stories, which have some astonishing parallels about race relations. These stories display the different yet similar views shared amongst their prospective family members, their peers, and their community. Knowing and understanding an accurate count of our history helps us to both learn from our mistakes that were made in the past and develop an appreciation for the diversity of the present. It provides us with a vision of unity in which people across races were fighting for a common cause. So, what are race relations? Race relations refers to the interactions between people of different races, including the way that they perceive and the way that they behave towards each other. It encompasses the social and political and cultural dynamics that shape the interactions and attitudes between individual groups of different races and different backgrounds. So we are very, very honored to have all of you with us today. Thank you all, the board members here of the Bridge Builders Committee. We have Mr. Dave Mason of the class of 1961. He was actually class president. We've got Miss Carolyn, class of 1967. Miss Terrell, class of 1963. We've got Mr. Jock, class of 1963. Mr. Richard, class of 1963. And Mr. John A. of 1963. All right. All right. Well, we want to start off with you, Dave. I know that you've got a very, very unique perspective on the kind of the definition and just how you see desegregation versus integration. And we want to start off with you and hear from you, Dave.
Well, thank you very much. And I think it's only appropriate that you start with the oldest person first. Uh, I'd like to start at the beginning, the first encounter that I had with racism. And it occurred when I was 5 years old. In Chapel Hill, during the time I was coming up, black people were not allowed to try to close on in the stores in Chapel Hill. As a result, we had to go to Durham if we wanted to do that. That was one place in Durham. I wish I could think of the name, but it was directly behind where Sears Roebuck used to be. Anyway, this particular place not only had clothes for females, but they also had chicken hot dogs for $1. My dad had given me $1. So we were at this store with my mom and one of her friends. And I took my dollar and I went down to the concession stand. And I was sitting down there and with my dollar, waiting for someone to come and ask me what I like to have. It never did happen. The next thing I knew, my mom comes in and says, David, we've been looking for you everywhere. I said, well, Mom, I just want to buy a hot dog with a Coke. I got $1. Back in the day, that was a lot of money. She said, but you're not supposed to be here. I said, why not? I've got $1. She said, but you can't eat here. I said, why not? I said, because this is for I own it. I mean, I'm 5 years old. I can't read, but there was a sign up here. So she said, colored people can't eat over here. And I said, what's colored? She said, it's people who are dark skinned like you. During the time I was coming up, I stayed in the black community. That was my first time ever hearing anyone being referred to as white. So I tried to get her to explain to me what it was to be colored. And she talked about skin color. And I said, well, Mom, you don't have dark skin like I do. He said, but I'm still colored. I said, I'm confused. She said, well, we'll talk about it more when we get home. When she got home, she tried to explain to me how some people were more privileged than others, and they were called white people. And that was the first time I ever heard the term white people. So I said, what's white people? I've never seen any people that were white. And she tried her best to explain it to me. But anyway, like I say, that was the very first encounter that I had with racism. Um, I guess the next thing that's important that happened to me was when I was at church. We had this one lady who played the organ at the church, and my mom played the piano for 71 years. This woman's name was Lillian Curry. She was, at that particular time, the only college graduate that went to St. Joseph Church. That's where we were. And there were a group of females around a tree, and they were talking. And she was having so much fun, so I sneaked up to see what they were talking about. I've always been interested in what grown-ups have to say. She was telling us that the Supreme Court had outlawed desegregation. And she was so happy because she said, no longer are we going to have hand-me-down books. And she identified so many benefits that we would have from that. Little did she realize that desegregation would not take place until 1966 in Chapel Hill. It took 12 years for this to take place. So the next thing that I recall happening was when I was in high school in the 10th grade, there was a minister in the community, not my community, but in the white community. Um, Charles Jones was his name. Charles Jones had come to our school, Lincoln High School, to get some black students to interact with white students. We weren't going to his church, but he just had a get together for this. And we did this on several occasions. And I have to candidly admit, prior to that, the only encounter that I had with white students were the students at UNC. And what would happen, we would have a leader to come and say, okay, during the time we have, when it snowed, then we got to go. And what we would do, we would go down to the back of Chapel Hill High School, which was on Franklin Street at that particular time. And we would have a snowball fight with the students. And needless to say, they were much bigger than we were, and they would always win, but it was just lots of fun. So, like I say, that was really great. The next thing that happened was the sit-in movement in 1960. Shortly after the sit-in movement, I was approached by a person named Harold Foster, who was commonly known as Hobo. And the primary reason he was known as Hobo is because at our school at Northside, for a long period of time, we did not have a cafeteria. And we were often sneak out to Mr. Donald Weaver's store. And Harold's favorite dish was a cake known as hobo. So that's how he got the name. He was a very brilliant individual. He was the school editor. Matter of fact, when we went to Central together as a sophomore, he did something that no one has ever done. He became the editor of the paper at that particular time. So anyway, getting back to Harold, he asked me about what did I think about the event that had taken place in Greensboro. And I very quickly told him, after thinking about the way I had been mistreated when I was 5 years old, that we should do something comparable to that. Because these students were only a little bit older than we were. So that prompted the very first sit-in movement in Chapel Hill. My father, my parents, did not find out until June that I was part of the movement. And the reason for that is because we did not want him to know what we were doing. He was very concerned that his job might be in jeopardy as a result of what we were doing. Be that as it may, I was sitting with my girlfriend's house, and he called down and said, "Dave, the police are here." I said, "What do they want?" "You know what they want." I said, "No, I don't know what they want." He said, "They want to arrest you." I said, "Okay." Before he could hang up the phone, Reverend Jones had called my house and indicated that he was willing to stand my bond and everyone else's bond. And we were so relieved of that. Well, after we went to Big John's place to do the sit-in, we were told by the policeman that Big John reserved the right to have us arrested shortly after, which he did. So after we were arrested, we went to court. We had a trial. There were 9 of us, and we became known as the Chapel Hill 9. When we went to court, the judge found us guilty. We were represented by, I can't think his name, but he was the first lawyer at UNC. He was the one who started Soul City. So if y'all can help me remember his name, I certainly would appreciate it. But anyway, he told the jury and the judge at that particular time that the only reason we were there was because we were black. We were found guilty. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me. And the reason that I say that is because during that time, Vietnam War was really heating up. And I was determined that there was no way that I was going to be doing. So what happened, we were found guilty. All of us appealed with the exception of one. And that particular individual wanted to go to school in September. So what happened shortly thereafter, I was scheduled to be examined for the armed forces. On the same day, after I had appealed my case, I called the police station to find out which one was more important, like I didn't know. So they told me that I had to go. That I had to go to court, which I did.
Yeah.
And what happened once again after the appeal, the case about racism was actually dismissed. And I was so happy for that because had it not been for the case, I could have ended up in jail, just like Harold Forster did. Primarily because he too refused to go into the military. He
Yeah.
served 2 years in prison because of his conviction.
Man, thank you, Mr. Mason. That and the gentleman that you were referring to, that was the first African American law school student. That was Mr. Floyd McKissick.
McKissick.
Is that said? Did I say that right?
Yeah, McKissick.
McKissick.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. Oh, Dave, thank you very much. This is WRWK 93.9 FM at Lothian, Virginia, and I am John Weaver, your host of Finding your guest host, regular guest host for Finding Our Fit. We are here today with the board members of the Bridge Builders community. They are all former students of the segregated schools of the 60s Lincoln High School and Chapel Hill High School. We are discussing race relations, the intersection between race and unity. We'd love to hear your questions and any comments that you have. So please give us a call at 804-464-1089 or pop a question into Facebook Live. Mr. Dave, thank you so much for sharing that. I'd next like to go to you, Carolyn. Ms. Carolyn of the class of 1967, you have some remarkable experiences that I know that you wanted to share with us.
Well, I want to say that go back to a couple of things that Dave said. Dave was one of the Chapel Hill 9, and Dave and those others that marched and participated in the sit-ins, they paved the way for us. I came into Chapel Hill High School in 1966 when they integrated. But by that time, much of the work had been done by the pioneers like Dave and others on Pound Jock and Terrell and others. So they paved the way, but I feel like we had to walk it. So in 1966, there was one school built in Chapel Hill that was supposed to solve the problem of integration or desegregation. And so one school was built in Chapel Hill High School, and the Lincoln High School, which was the Black high school, and Chapel Hill High School, which was then on Franklin Street, closed, and the schools were merged. And so that's what I want to focus on a little bit. So I was a senior that year, and it was just a year of confusion for us, a year of hurt for us, a year that we felt our identity was being erased. But we knew we didn't have a choice as students. But I also that year realized even that education was not equal. for example, I don't know how they selected us in terms of the AP and IB classes, but we did not have AP and IB classes at Lincoln High School. So when we started our senior year and we were placing those classes, again, we had not had the prerequisite courses. And so it put us at a disadvantage in terms of how hard we had to work to be able to achieve, which we had the ability to do. So it was, you know, it was not a lot of support for us coming into this system that was new to us and was very challenging. But needless to say, we realized what it was going to take, and we put in the work, and we were successful, and we graduated in 1967. We went in as seniors and we graduated. And I remember particularly my English IB class, you know, and the kids in that class, you know, they had to work because the IB classes are difficult and they're challenging, but it was not at the same rate that we had to work. We had night groups in our homes. We had afternoon sessions in small groups that we put together because they let it be known, especially my IB English teacher, that if you don't pass this course, you're not graduating. And so anyway, but that year was a year of transition. We lost, for example, we had our principal, Mr. McDougall, that had been a principal for, I don't know, 16 or 17 years. When the schools merged, he was demoted to assistant principal. We had Mr. Pierman, who was the coach, Coach Pierman, who was Lincoln was one of the winningest a football team in the state, and he was demoted to JV. And a lot of the teachers, they did not transfer over because when they did the hiring, they merged things, and so we lost a lot of our teachers that we were very familiar with and had invested in us. We lost. They kept the tiger, but we lost our colors, our orange and black, which was Lincoln colors. We lost that. It was just in the powers above in trying to merge. It was just not good. I'm not saying they did not do the best they could in the time they were in, but it really left scars on us. I remember being on a panel not too long ago, a little while back, and one of my white colleagues was talking, and she had no idea the impact that it had made on us as Blacks emerging into that school. And she compared it to just another day, like that I picked up my desk and moved it to the next room. That's the impact that it had on her. And so she had no clue. And I don't think a lot of whites did, at least the students had a clue what we were going through and trying to, with this decision that had been made. I know Stanley Vickers too. I also want to speak about him. I know he also helped pave the way. You know, his parents, he was 10 at that time. His parents had requested that he be allowed to go to what was Carver Elementary School because it was closer than the Black school north side that they were busing him across town to. And they denied his request. And so there was a federal appeal, and the appeal was they did win the appeal. I think it was 1961. And so Stanley, by that time, Stanley and Ted Stone, I think were the two that went into junior high school. So that decision also helped was one of the cornerstones that helped pave the way in terms of the integration or desegregation in Chapel Hill. So I just wanted to mention him. But, you know, we were very bright, you know, students. But it was a struggle for us. It was a lot of hard work, commitment. And like I said, almost a lot of our cultural identity that we had was just kind of wiped away. So I think that's about what I would say in terms of the education and my experience in terms of high school.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. I know that there was one other aspect that I wanted you to share, and that was about the Unity Baptist University Baptist Church. It is remarkable and very, very informative to hear and have all of y'all here today to share not only the Black experience, and we're getting ready to hear from our white colleagues here and their experiences, but to see that even then, of course, this fight could not have happened and the progress could not have been made without the unity. And the beauty of your stories here, especially with you, Dave, and sharing about Reverend Jones, and Carolyn, with you, and I know that you get ready to share now about the University Baptist Church. I think that that's that important connection when we look at how we came from one place of being segregated to the desegregation, having a knowledge of all that was lost during that process when it was supposed to be something good. But again, a lot of that is not talked about or spoken to with regards to our history. And I think that's important in reference to our struggle, and we're going to really tie that in reference to it being relevant today. So would you share quickly about the University Baptist Church?
Well, during the earlier years, of course, there were very few Black churches. The University Baptist Church was a predominantly white church. I would say a white church, but they helped us. I'll say us. I wasn't there at that time, but form a Black church called First Baptist. Now the name changed a couple of times over the years, but it's First Baptist. And today, the churches are still mainly, University Baptist Church is still mainly white. There's some integration there. And First Baptist is mainly Black. But that's by choice of worshipers. But they gave certain things like furniture and different things to help support the church to be established and everything. So we still, to today, we have a relationship with them. They come to our church once a year, and we go to their church once a year, and fellowship and have dinner, etc. So, and the pastors keep in contact. They have a relatively new pastor now, Dr. Burgess, and he and Dr. Coleman, the pastor at our church, First Baptist, have a good working relationship. So, and I think it was Road Man said he didn't want the grass to grow up. He wanted us to stay in touch and everything. So that's a little bit about the two churches.
Thank you, Carolyn. And again, this is WRWK 93.9 FM, Midlothian, Virginia. I'm John Weaver, your regular guest host of Finding Our Fit. We're here today with the Bridge Builders, the board members of the Bridge Builders Committee, former students of the segregated Lincoln High School and Chapel Hill High Schools back in the 1960s, discussing race relations, the integration between race and unity. Again, we would love for any of your questions or comments. Please give us a call at 804-464-1089 or pop a comment or question in the chat on Facebook Live. Ms. Terrell, we're looking for you to share your perspective and some of the things that you saw during your time at Chapel High and back during desegregation.
Right. And my story is certainly different from Dave's and Carolyn's, obviously, or it will be obvious. A privileged white girl, is how I grew up. I was in segregated schools from kindergarten until I graduated from Chapel Hill High School in 1963. I grew up in a small town, Lumberton, North Carolina, a southeastern city in North Carolina. In that county where Lumberton was, there were 4 school systems, 4 school districts. There was a district for the whites, there was a district for the blacks, there was a district for the Lumbee Indians, and then there was a school district for the Smilings. Now, Smiling comes from a last name, which is why it's called that. But the Smilings were people that none of the other races would accept. So it became necessary for them to have their own school district. So some of the background for where I was in Lumberton. I had a Black woman named Blanche who looked after me while my mother taught school. She, you know, if you've seen The Help or read The Help, part of that is my story. Blanche only could use the restroom upstairs. She had to come in our back door. If she was in a car with my mother or my dad, she rode in the back seat. So this is how I'm growing up. This is what I'm seeing. My dad was a solicitor at that time in Lumberton, and he took it upon himself that he wanted to rid Robeson County of the Ku Klux Klan. And that became his mission for the time that he was a solicitor. In 1952, a cross was burned in our front yard. Now, there are 2 different stories, 2 different family stories, as well as news stories. Was it someone just pulling a hoax, or was it literally the Klan? Either way, it made a pretty loud statement about what my dad was doing. So we moved to Raleigh in 58, I think, and Dad now is Attorney General of North Carolina. And he sees that things in North Carolina are not happening as they should. So as the lead attorney for the state, he in 1958 said, integration is the law of the land, and that's the route North Carolina will take. Now, there was some reluctance on his part. I mean, it was a bold political move to do that. And, you know, he wasn't, you know, it wasn't in your face, we're going to do this. It was a lot of the, you know, political stuff that was involved with that. So that was my time in junior high. Then, because females at that time couldn't go to UNC in any degree that I wanted, I went to Peace College, which is in Raleigh, a small, at that time, girls' school, very conservative. We had to go to chapel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. One Wednesday, all of us went in to be seated at chapel, but we were told we couldn't meet that day, that we need to go back to our dorms or wherever. Found out that a choir that was coming to our college to sing during our chapel time, there were 2 Black girls in the choir. And so Peace College would not let them in, would not let them sing for the chapel service. Okay, so now it's, you know, middle 60s, I guess, at this point, and I come to Chapel Hill as a junior at University of North Carolina, and my whole world is changed. My brother at this time has already marched with Dr. King in Alabama. He marched practically side by side with him. He is protesting both the Vietnam War and what's going on in terms of race. And I'm being surrounded by all of these liberal ideas that the University of North Carolina presented me. A whole new way of looking at the world. So as we looked at Chapel Hill and Carrboro and all that was going on, which was so despicable, it was actually Chapel Hill and the University of North Carolina that saved me, you know, that got my head screwed on right, being there and seeing how the world should be. Big basketball fan, and what Dean Smith was doing for integration with Charlie Scott, his first African-American player on his team, certainly was a big part of all that I was going through in terms of getting my head turned in the right direction. So very different story, but that was the way, how I grew up and where I came from in terms of race.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Mr. Jock, How about sharing a little bit of your childhood?
I love hearing these stories, by the way, for one reason. I'm a reporter and a curious critter anyway, and I'm learning stuff about all y'all. And I love some of these stories that we haven't heard. I came from a university family here in UNC Chapel Hill. My granddad was hired by Frank Porter Graham as the head librarian. And so my granddad was professor of library science and head of the Wilson Library from the 40s and into the 50s. And that family was very conservative, Northern, Midwestern. But my mother was a pre-hippie. She was a bohemian lefty liberal, and she had me out there marching in the streets of Chapel Hill in 1960, 61. And I just thought that's what you're supposed to do. I mean, Dave, your story about being denied the ability to buy that hot dog, that just rips my soul. So public accommodations was a big deal in Chapel Hill, summer of 63, 64. While you were one of the Chapel Hill 9 at Big John's Colonial Drugstore, we were all out there marching in the streets together. And bridge builders revealed to me the fact that Dave and I were out there on the streets together. We didn't find that out for another 50 plus years until we got together with this committee. How cool is that? Here's another story. I was a photographer too. I shot for the Daily Tar Heel and the Chapel Hill Weekly, as it was called at the time. And I was young and naive and brash, and I was out there taking pictures of that demonstration in front of Carswell's place. And I decided, you know what? I've got my pictures. I'm just going to pick up a sign. I had been out there on assignment for the newspaper, so I was marching around with a sign, my camera slung over my shoulder. The next thing I knew, I was in the publisher's office, and Jim Shoemaker, the editor, was shouting at me, and he's going to use words that I cannot use on the radio in reference to my behavior. But basically he said, I don't pay you to picket, I pay you to, expletive deleted, take pictures. And he, at the same time, he's shouting at me. I can see he's sort of grinning because he understands this is an education for this young man about conflict of interest. And sure enough, I didn't get fired, and I got my pictures, and I got the picket anyway. A word about Charlie Jones. My grandmother, again, the conservative, Northern racist, was a member of the Presbyterian Church, the University Presbyterian Church, when Charlie Jones was the preacher there, and he invited some Black folks to join the congregation. And some of y'all know it split the congregation right down the middle. And a lot of people stayed at that church. And Charlie Jones left, of course, because he pretty much had to. And half of the folks went with him. My grandmother stayed at the University Presbyterian Church, and my mama walked out and went with this new guy and his newfangled ideas that she agreed with. And don't you know that had an impact on our family? And Charlie Jones was a lifelong friend of all of us. Finally, let me say a word about my work as a journalist relative to the bridge builders. In 2008, after the murder of Eve Carson, UNC student body president, by two Black kids from Durham, I became so concerned about the state of the school to prison pipeline and the availability of guns and just the general nature of things in Durham relative to my little hometown that I started a community newspaper for that part of Durham called the Durham Voice. And that was 14 years ago. When I retired 2 years ago, that newspaper went into hibernation, and as of right now, it just got revived with a new professor taking over the Durham Voice. And so there's a sense of satisfaction there that something right was done in the face of pretty terrible wrong. It's such an honor, let me just say, because we're going to pass this off to Richard, and John Alcott. It's been a real honor to be a part of this group. Feel like we're a part of something larger than ourselves, and just the fact that Dave and I, and Carolyn too, obviously, have become great pals. We have an expression at the Bridge Builders relative to Lincoln High School and Chapel Hill High School, and this our little motto is, "It's never too late to be a classmate." I'll leave it there.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Um, Again, this is WRWK 93.9 FM, Midlothian, Virginia. I'm John Weaver, regular guest host of Finding Our Fit. We're here today with the board members of the Bridge Builders Committee. They are former members of the segregated schools in Chapel Hill, North Carolina from the 60s, Lincoln High School, the Blacks Only School, Chapel Hill High School, the Whites Only High School. And we're discussing race relations, the intersection between race and unity. We would love to hear your questions, comments, and even concerns. Give us a call at 804-464-1089 or pop a question into the chat and Facebook Live. So with that being said, Mr. Richard, you've got to enlighten us about your stories again. This is a remarkable sharing of individuals fighting for the same cause back during the same time on different sides of the fence, seeing different perspectives. And it is so incredibly enlightening what y'all are sharing with us today. So, Mr. Richard, share with us.
Thanks, John, for organizing this. As a kid, I was born in 1945. Mid-50s, I was a very sheltered kid. I grew up in the town of Carrboro, not Chapel Hill. When at that time, Carrboro had an elementary school that was part of the county school system. It was not even joined with Chapel Hill then. Late 50s, the town of Carrboro folks voted to separate from the Orange County schools and instead become part of the Chapel Hill city schools. And so my term in school there, was part county school, part city school. But anyway, those of you that know anything about Carrboro and whatever, Carrboro now is a pretty neat little town, very thought about it, very cosmopolitan, whatever. Well, back in the 50s, it was anything but. Carrboro has still now is referred to as a mill town. Well, we had mills, but it was never a mill town. I refer to it as a railroad town that actually had mills, because we had the railroad always. But anyway, it was a working class town more so than a university town. So even though we were right next door to Chapel Hill, there were two separate communities here that actually had a group, and there's a district called Midway in town, and now that's part in Chapel Hill, part in Carrboro. And that's where most of that used to be, that was the black drawing line that separated Carrboro and Chapel Hill. That's where the community separated, was that Midway community. And we, it was more than just regional, it was philosophical as well. Carrboro was a much more conservative community than Chapel Hill. Not saying that Chapel Hill was all that liberal, but it was much more liberal than the town of Carrboro. And anyway, so I grew up in this environment, and fortunately, my folks. My dad was a building contractor in the community, and built lots of. He built only nice upper class houses, college professors and that sort of thing, and very distinctive stuff. He was very, very focused on that group and whatever. But anyway, so as a building contractor, he employed white guys and black guys, built, brick mason, stone masonry or masonry in general would seem to be in the Carrboro Chapel Hill neighborhood, seemed to be a reserved occupation for blacks. And I don't think I knew anybody that did brickwork or poured concrete or whatever that was white. It was almost a reserved occupation, but still, my dad employed these, had these people for employees, and one day I guess I was about 12 years old, and I knew about my dad, and he was talking about, his growing up as a kid and whatever. He grew up as a poor little kid in Chatham County. My grandfather operated a grist mill. He didn't own it. He just operated. He was the proprietor of a grist mill and whatever. And as this was on the Hall River in Chatham County. And my dad was talking about, growing up there as a poor white kid. He had to leave Chatham County after the 8th grade to go to high school because there was no high school for him to go to in Chatham County. It was on the other side of the county, the only one that there was. But anyway, he was talking about, growing up there at this mill and whatever, this was like the 1850s and not the 1950s when you consider where he was. My dad was born in 1904. He was the next to the youngest of 13 kids. So it was a totally different environment. And he was talking about, the kids that he had to play with. He had a couple of brothers and sisters that were very young. Most of a number of his brothers and sisters were already old enough to be married out of house and had kids that were beginning to have kids of their own. He was just a small kid himself. But he said there was a black family that lived across the street, across the bridge from where the mill was there. And he said, they played together. Nobody said anything about who they were. Nobody said anything about who he was. That these, it was just natural because they were neighbors, that they should do these things together. Now, he said, and later on, he realized that as little kids, that seemed to be fine. But when these people become adults, then there seemed to be some, okay, blacks and whites don't necessarily mix, But he said, the one thing he had always wondered, my dad was a conscientious Christian. He really was. And he said, I've always wondered why God made us different. And I remember that distinctly. He said, I can't understand why God made us all this so different, And he said, I don't understand. He said, we're all, we all have a soul. We all are a being. Why are we so different? And why do we have to acknowledge that difference? Radical thinking for a Chatham County little kid, farm boy there, And but he, at the time he was not a social advocate, of anything like this. He was a very quiet man, very reserved man. But I remember that to the day, and thinking about the community that he had. He remember the number of times we had interactions with the guys that he employed and whatever. And there was one guy that he was one hell of a worker. That my dad didn't have to be a black guy. And I remember this guy coming to our house at 3 o'clock on Saturday, Sunday morning, Saturday night, knocking on the door, standing there crying, saying, "Mr. Carl, I need some money to bury my grandmother." He buried his grandmother probably 10 times, But my dad he'd give him $10 or whatever. He'd go on, and then he'd take that $10 out of next week's pay, kind of thing. And it was just, but there was this interaction, but still, there was no this interaction. It was this, the black and the white, but not this. And that, as I look back on it now, I think that was probably as progressive as we could have been at the time. It's still been socially accepted, in the white community and whatever. And it just really, it made me feel kind of funny because, here again, like I say, Carver was a very conservative. It was working class people. It was the working class in Chapel Hill. Kids, even the white kids, when we went to Chapel Hill High, many of them were referred to as lint heads because, lint heads, working in a mill, you get lint flying around in the air, And it was just a derogatory term that even the Chapel Hill kids, white kids, applied to the Carver white kids. So, there was a lot of social dynamics going on here at the time, and it made me think about a lot of different things. And I don't remember ever getting involved actively. I remember seeing and hearing about a lot of the stuff, but I was on the other side of the tracks, literally, for Chapel Hill, and getting involved in these problems that's going on in Chapel Hill. Well, that just wasn't done by a little white teenage kid from Carver at the time.
Right.
And I remember so it's like looking back at news. You mentioned the Chapel Hill Weekly, whatever. I remember seeing graph on the front one page one time of the Chapel Hill Weekly, and it was some people marching in front of what was then called a Long Meadow Dairy Bar in Chapel Hill on West Franklin Street. And it was this young black girl, I don't know if she was a high schooler or maybe a student, college student or whatever. She was carrying a sign, and at the time she said, "Khrushchev can eat here, but I can't."
Hmm.
And this is when Khrushchev was premier of what was in the Soviet Union. I looked at that and I thought, Jesus Christ, what a sentiment that says,
Right.
and it just it struck me, and I said, something needs to be done here. Well,
Man, well,
I got on with
Richard, thank you so much. And hey, for the sake of time, I'm just going to go right to you, Mr. John A. The reason we are all here, Mr. John A. is actually the whole Bridge Builders Committee, and this whole process is Mr. John A.'s creation, and we saved the best for last. So, Mr. John.
John Weaver. No, that's not right. But I want to thank you. I want to thank you for having this forum here in Richmond and on YouTube later on, so that the bridge builders could show ourselves. We're usually on the Zoom and for our meetings, except you guys all in Chapel Hill can get together at a restaurant and enjoy a little fun and camaraderie. And I have to come in from West Coast time in Eugene, Oregon, and see the middle of the night or before the sun is up when I join the meeting that you all are having at some breakfast club. So, any rate, all this and more is, to my mind, related to Robert Cole and George Booth, who I met in Sophie Martin's backyard next to the Carolina Inn, probably in about 1956. And George and Robert were from the Black community. I was from the white community. And we would meet in Sophie Martin's backyard with her sons, Ned and Frank. And we would play football on fall afternoons while I was carrying papers for the Chapel Hill Weekly at that time. A few years later, Jock was taking pictures for it. But at that time, probably in 56, I had my wonderful green 2-speed Schwinn bike. And I used to pick up my papers at the weekly office, smelling all that lead fume from the linotype machine with that hot type. And I would pedal over towards Pittsburgh Street and where the Carolina Inn was. And I would dawdle there with football. And on an October afternoon, cheerful, bright, brisk, and then who would turn out and play a little bit of pickup football? Well, among others, Robert Cole and George Booth. And so we get together and pick up sides. And Ned Martin would say, well, you be on this side, you be on that side. And John, would you mind playing with George and Robert? And I would think, you're acting as if this was a default. I want to tell you, Robert Cole could fling a football over the hedges and over the house that Sophie Martin lived in. For me to be on his football team in 6th grade 3 guys on a side and play with George and Robert was the top of my game. I learned quite a bit about flinging a football. Many years went by, and it came to me that I might go to my grave and never say thank you to Robert and to George for teaching me a little bit about football and letting us play together. And at that time, I said, I've got to do something. And that's when I came back to Jock. And Jock and I then figured out Dave Mason is the voice of the Black community from 1950s and 1960s who's alive. And we were able to have a cup of coffee at that mill where the lint heads used to come, Car Mills. And I remember that discussion. And I remember with relief that Dave would say, well, yeah, let's see about working together and seeing we can have something that has turned into the Bridge Builders. And so ever since that time, 7 years ago, very powerful. During that time, I learned a little bit about churches. And I went to Charlie Jones's split off church. My mother, I think, went to the Presbyterian church. And when Charlie Jones was ushered out, my family joined the community church that he was the minister for. And fortunately, Charlie lived directly through the woods. I could literally throw a stone from my house and pluck the roof of his house across the ravine. And that allowed me over time to learn something from him about how people live and work together, and something of his steadfast. I mean, I don't think he saw it as curse. This is the way you live. And I was pleased that I could learn a tiny bit from that. Tiny bit enough so he could be the minister at my wedding, which I really was pleased about. And pleased enough that he could let me know about the importance of spirit in one's life. And eventually, for me to go visit St. Joseph's Church, where Dave is a member, and worship there. And so I'm thinking about the opportunities to be together, to build bridges, to uphold the work of all people in our community. And now Dave calls himself living on the west, the far west side of Chapel Hill. And I want to tell you, in Oregon, it's the far, 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 far west, about 3,000 miles in Eugene. It's almost tomorrow here, not quite. It's almost tomorrow. And it's given me the opportunity also to be on our Bridge Builder group and to talk to Dr. Daniels, who I'm gonna a slight nudge for for Dr. Daniels, because I've invited her to come speak by Zoom at my church, Friends Meeting in Eugene, or maybe a church that I like to go to in Eugene also, St. Mark's CME Church. Any rate, my thought is all about how we have intergenerational working together, how we try to uphold and support and celebrate each other. And I'm so glad for you guys, because George and Robert are no longer there to throw passes that I can catch. but I give tribute to them for helping pull us together. And that's my appreciation for us working together. Thank you all. And John, thanks for being the intergenerational put together. You're the glue. Good job.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.